Hi, my name's Elizabeth Johnson. I'm in Mr. Sizemore's English 1302 class, and I have read pages 560 through 581 in the textbook. The topic of this section of chapter 17, it's reading a poem in its elements, and it really just talks about how you can get anything from a poem, like if you read into it well enough, like this quote I found in the book. It's on page 561, and it's under a first reading, duffing into it. It says, "We duff into our first reading of a poem. We read that poem imperfectly. Thoroughness would be fatal, but the better to read the second. We read the second to better read the third," and so on and so forth. For this one, I'm using Mr. Sizemore's example on page, for the major supporting detail, I'm going to use the critical reading section on page 564, and it says everyday language. Poetry uses everyday language in really uncommon ways. It says to rise above the commonplace and avoid cliche. And then it says certain expressions or words like come to use on automatic pilot. Like me example, I say like all the time as a word buffer. Like she said this or she said that. Like it's just part of our everyday language. And then the example for this is Those Winter Sundays on page 571. It's a poem written by Robert Hayden. You can really tell what this poem is talking about. Okay, so for example, on line 2 of stanza 1, it says, "Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue, black cold." Like, for it's saying that he works in extremely cold weather. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday. So he works so hard during the week that his hands hurt. And no one ever thanked him. So obviously nobody ever thanked him for his work. Okay, explain in your video why your direct quote is an example of the topic of the chapter. Like I said earlier, you can just tell, you know what he's talking about. It's using words that describe coldness and hard work, like blue, black, cold. That's really cold, okay? And then cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday. That's everyday language. You know what they're talking about. And I guess that's it. And this is chapter 17, reading a poem in its elements.